Welcome students to the quick revision of inflorescence, one of the most important sections in the NEET examination. In fact, we can expect sure questions from this particular section, and a tricky part of this section is that a lot of concepts, something like mix upon each other in the sense that there are like terms, there are small differences. So be sure that this section dealing with inflorescence is clearly understood before attempting the NEET examination. So what exactly is inflorescence? Inflorescence denote the arrangement and distribution of flowers on an axis. So if a plant has a bunch of flowers developing on a common axis, which means that there could be patterns in it, there could be ways of arrangement. So that development is basically called inflorescence. Before going into the details, there are some terms which will occur again and again, and which we ought to be very clear about. So we are looking at that terms before going into the details of inflorescence. And the first one is peduncle, which basically means that it's the stalk or the axis on which we have the bunch of flowers, the inflorescence developing. Receptacle is a flattened peduncle. Then acropetal is a way of arrangement of flowers in the sense that you have the young flowers at the top, at the apex, which means that the older flowers are seen at the base. Centripetal basically means the young flowers are towards the center, which means that the older flowers will be seen towards the periphery. You also have another type of flower arrangement called centrifugal. Basically, centrifugal flowers basically means, and opposite to the previous discussed case, the older flowers will be seen at the center and the younger flowers towards the periphery. So going into the finer details of inflorescence, can be basically divided into solitary inflorescence, Racemose inflorescence, Cymose, mixed case, and the last case, which can be called the specialized case of special kinds of inflorescence. Solitary is further divided into terminal. A good example is poppy, and another subdivision of solitary is axillary. A good example is petunia and shoofo. Now the term itself indicates what we are dealing with. Terminal means at the tip, axillary means from the axis. So flowers developing from the axis and flowers developing from the tip. Going on to the second kind, the Racemose inflorescence, very important because this inflorescence is very commonly found, and there's a lot of subdivisions with a lot of peculiarities. So be clear that this type of inflorescence is well studied. There are certain common features of Racemose inflorescence. The first thing is that it's indeterminate as well as indefinite. What does it basically? It basically means that the inflorescence, the tip at which the inflorescence develops, is continuously growing, which means that the growth continues, it doesn't stop there. And the flowers are acropetal as well as centripetal. Now, Racemose inflorescence can be divided into two types, that is simple and compound. Simple, basically, once again, it's indefinite, and the peduncle is unbranched. That is the inflorescence axis, the axis on which the flowers develop is unbranched. Going on to the specific types of subdivisions of Racemose inflorescence, to put it more correctly, the basic subdivisions of simple Racemose inflorescence, we start with typical raceme. Here the peduncle is unbranched, that is the inflorescence axis is unbranched. The way in which the flowers are arranged is acropetal, which means that you have the younger flowers at the tip and the older flowers at the base. and the individual flowers are stalked or pedicellate, which means that the flowers, each flower has its own stalk. A good example is examples are radish and lupin. Going on to the second kind of racemose inflorescence, we have the Corymb. Interestingly, this inflorescence is quite similar in features to what we discussed just now. That is, the Corymb inflorescence is similar to the typical raceme. So what is the difference? The difference is that whereas in typical raceme, the arrangement is acropetal, here, as the pedicels of the lower flowers are longer, we have all the flowers at the same level. So note that point. So the interesting thing is that instead of only the younger flowers at the apex, here both the older flowers as well as the younger flowers are sharing the same height. So that's a key point. That's a key point which differentiates Corymb from typical raceme, and a notable example is candy tuft. Going on to the third case in the subdivisions under simple racemose, we are looking to a kind of a variation of the Corymb, that is Corymbose Raceme. Once again, interestingly, Corymbose Raceme, as the wording itself indicates, it's quite similar to the Corymb inflorescence which we just discussed. But so what's the difference here? The difference here is that the flowers are not at the same level. So that's a key point. So if you have a Corymb inflorescence where instead of being the flowers at the same height, they are developing in such a manner that there's a height difference based on the time at which the development happens, then you can call it a Corymbose Raceme. And a good example is mustard. Going on to the fourth case, quite an important case, also because a particular family is named after it. It's Umbel. The family is Umbelliferae. So here we are seeing a particular development, a kind of a new feature, that is the development of what is called a awl, that is a ring-shaped development of bracts. Bracts are something like scalish leaves. So the development of all of bracts, which in botanical terms is called Involucre, is the characteristic feature of Umbel. And the peduncle, that is the inflorescence axis, is reduced. Now, as I already mentioned, a family, this Umbelliferae, is named after this particular type of inflorescence. And a very typical classical notable example is Brahmi. And from the diagram itself, we can see that we are seeing the flowers which are stalked, developing from an area in between the bracts. So note that point. Going on to the fifth, very important. In fact, it's extremely important because spike inflorescence is a particular topic which has been asked many times in the NEET examination. So what are the features of spike inflorescence? The peduncle is elongated. That is the common stalk on which the flowers develop. That's the inflorescence axis is elongated. We have sessile flowers, which means that the flowers are not pedicellate. The flowers don't have their own stalk. And once again, the arrangement of flowers is acropetal. That means you have the younger flowers at the apex, at the tip, and the older flowers at the bottom. So from the diagram itself, we can see that it's quite a compact arrangement. The flowers are bunched together in a very condensed manner, and we can easily see that there are bracts in between the flowers. So that's also very important. A notable example is bottle brush. Now, going on to the next case, next subdivision of the Racemose inflorescence is termed quite similarly, that is spikelet. So, from the wording itself, we get a feeling that this particular inflorescence should have something similar with the just mentioned case, which is true, and that similarity is that spikelet is something like a condensed or something like a less developed spike. So here the spike is small, which obviously means that we are dealing with fewer flowers. And there's a very important characteristic feature of spikelet, that is you see two scales at the base, and these scales are called glooms. So note that point, the development of glooms is the characteristic feature of spikelet, and this kind of development is seen in a very important family, that is Gramineae, the grass family, in which most of the pulses, I mean rice, wheat, maize, all those cases are involved. So spikelet is a characteristic feature of the grass family. Going on to another case which is no less important, and whose features are also quite similar, is catkin. So what is catkin? Catkin inflorescence it's a spike. That's the interesting thing. It's a kind of spike, but here the flowers are unisexual, which basically means that you either have the female flowers or the male flowers. You don't have a case where both the male and female flowers are found together. And a very characteristic feature of catkin is that the whole thing is developing as a condensed group like structure, and it's usually found hanging. So that also means that once the flowers mature, once the whole development matures and ripens, on the way to becoming the fruits, the whole thing falls down. So that's a key point. And a very notable, important example as far as catkin inflorescence is concerned is the mulberry. And from the diagram itself, we can easily see that it's hanging. So that's one of the characteristic features of the catkin inflorescence. So once again, note the point that catkin is a spike-like inflorescence. The only difference is that the flowers are unisexual. Going on to the next very important case, inflorescence, Spadix. And Spadix, the peduncle, that is the inflorescence axis, is fleshy. And what is the key feature of Spadix? So there should be no doubt about that. The most important characteristic feature of Spadix is that the whole inflorescence is usually found covered by a colored or green bract which is well developed, and this well developed bract structure is called spathe. For example, if you look at a diagram of Colocasia, in which the spathe is not removed, you can see that fleshy, very well broadened structure is covering the entire inflorescence. So once again, note spathe, a colored or green bract, is the characteristic feature of the Spadix inflorescence. And a key point is that the spathe in a lot of cases aids in pollination. So note that point. Going on to the ninth case, as far as the simple racemose inflorescences is concerned, is called the Capitulum. This is a very well-known case because a lot of specimens which belong to this inflorescence is well known horticulturally. Horticulturally means that in for growing in gardens, that is, we have Cynia, chrysanthemum, sunflower. So, and what are the characteristic features of capitulum? One thing is the development of specialized flower structures, that is florets, which are of two types, and is tubular and ligulate. Another key point is how the flowers are arranged. The flowers are centripetal, which means that you have the younger flowers towards the center and the older flowers at the periphery. And capitulum is this is a characteristic inflorescence of the family Compositae, and as already mentioned, a very important example, a notable example of this type of inflorescence is the sunflower, that is Helianthus anus. And as we can see, there are very well developed flower parts. That is the ray florets on the periphery. It's well developed. This ray florets, the flowers which are on the which are well developed, and surrounding the core part is ligulate, whereas the disc florets, that is the flower components which are in the middle, quite compact. They are the tubular type of flowers. So once again, this is a very important example of capitulum, that is sunflower. Now we are going to have a look at the important features of the Cymose inflorescence, that is the third major subdivision under inflorescence. And Cymose, unlike Racemose, is determinate or definite, which basically means that you have the when you have the shoot tip developing into an inflorescence, that growth ends there. It no longer continues its growth by any other means. So not that point. So Cymose inflorescence is determinate or definite, which basically means that the tip of the main axis ends in a flower, and that development, that growth ends there, which obviously means that further growth is by means of lateral branches. So looking at the subdivisions under Cymose inflorescence, it's basically looking at how many branches are being formed. So not that point. The differences, the subdivisions under Cymose inflorescence is based on how many branches are getting formed after the terminal flower develops. So not that point. So the first division is uniparous or monochasial cyme. And interestingly, this type of inflorescence has two variations, that is helicoid and scorpioid. Helicoid, from the diagram itself, we can see that it's something like a helix, in the sense that you have the leaves developing at one location, in the sense that at one side, and you have the flowers coming at the opposite side. So and it can be something like curvy or going straight up. And when this type of inflorescence becomes quite zigzag or something like a scorpion pattern, it's called scorpioid. And in scorpioid, we can easily see that that the pattern is alternating. So helicoid, a classical notable example is begonia. Scorpioid, the example is heliotropics. Going on to the second subdivision under Cymose inflorescence, as I already mentioned, the first one was uniparous, the second one is biparous or dichasial cyme. So what is, as I already mentioned, the whole division is based on how many branches are getting formed. So in this case, it simply means that we are dealing with two branches after the main branch, or after the branch which ends in a flower. So not that point. And this feature which I just mentioned, I seen in the diagram which is now being shown. I can see the main stem developing into a flower, which is that alignment is continuing with the main stem, and you have lateral branches coming out, and usually two lateral branches. That's why it's called bipares or dichasial cyme. And important examples are jasmine, bougainvillea, and inflorescence of the teak tree. Going on to the third case, multipares or polychasial cyme. Naturally, people should be getting the idea of what this means from the discussion which we are having till now. That is, we are having multiple branches. That's the point. A very famous example is Calotropis or Medal. Now, there's a very important point about this inflorescence, in the sense that the first division, that is, it is the first division or the first growth of the inflorescence, which is multipares, in the sense that having multiple branches. But the second division usually is dichasial, not the point. Second division usually is bipares or dichasial, and later on divisions of the inflorescence which bears the inflorescence is monochasial or unipare. So note that point. Multipares inflorescence under Cymose doesn't mean that the whole thing is multipares. It also constitutes the other two types of Cymose inflorescence. So don't forget that point. And here peduncle is multipodial. Going on to the fourth case, it's the Cymose head, a kind of condensed cyme type of inflorescence. And here the inflorescence is also called Glomerule. And two notable cases are Albizia and Acacia or Kikar. Kikar is the vernacular name for Acacia, so note that point. Now going on to a extremely important section of this inflorescence, that is the special kind of inflorescence, which basically means that inflorescence which has some unique features, which are something like standalone cases. So the first case in that group is Hypanthodium. The receptacle is flower-shaped, and this type of inflorescence is commonly found in the family Moraceae, and it's well known as the ficus family. So in the sense that we have the peepal tree, we have the banyan tree, and also the fig. So all these plants have this type of inflorescence. And here, as already told, there's an inner container, like inner space, which is caused by the development of the fork-shaped receptacle. There's a pore at the top. Then you have the male flowers developing near the pore, and the female flowers at the bottom. And in between is a very interesting feature. You have something called the Gall Flowers, which can also be sterile or neuter flowers. Now, what is the Gall Flowers? Gall Flowers basically are flowers which doesn't develop into fruits. Not that point. Gall Flowers doesn't develop into fruits. Their basic role is more than that for attracting insects for pollination. Going on to the second special kind of standalone inflorescence is what is called Veticillaster. Veticillaster is basically, that naming is due to a particular condensed foliage-like structure, which we will be covering shortly. So here there are two clusters of dichasial cyme. Note the point. So Veticillaster, even though we are calling it a special inflorescence, it has the dichasial cyme. So two clusters of dichasial cyme with monochasial branches in the axils of opposite leaves. So that's the key point. Now going on to the fact or to the key point why it is called so. So the clusters look like a owl, or the clusters look like a ring-like development, which is termed verticil. So it's because of this cluster, which is called verticil, we call this type of inflorescence as Veticillaster. And this type of inflorescence is characteristic of the family Labiatae. Now, a very notable famous example is Oxymum sanctum, that is the holy the Tulsi. Also, we have another important example, that is Salvia. And we can have a diagram to get a finer idea of what this verticil means. You have basically it's something like a bunched or a crowded inflorescence development, which is quite foliaceous in the sense that the whole thing is bunched together and looking like a owl. That's why it's called a verticil, and that's exactly why this inflorescence is called Veticillaster. So note that point. We have the diagram, and hopefully we are getting a better idea of why this particular inflorescence is called Veticillaster. Going on to the last case, the last inflorescence which we discussed in this quick revision, it's called Cyathium. And Cyathium is a interesting case, unlike the other case, in the sense that we have the whole inflorescence, or not the point. The whole inflorescence is looking like a single flower. So that's very interesting. It's a case where when you have a look at the inflorescence, we are not able to something like look at individual flowers. The whole thing looks like a single flower. And here there's a very prominent single female flower developing, and that female flower is surrounded by a lot of male flowers. Another extremely important point, especially when you look at the NEET examination point of view, is the presence of Achlamydeous flowers. So what do you mean by Achlamydeous flowers? Flowers in which there's no calyx and corolla are called Achlamydeous flowers, and Achlamydeous flowers is a characteristic feature of the example which we are discussing here, especially the Euphorbia species, and in poinsettia, that is Euphorbia pulcherrima, we see a prominent the prominent feature of it having the Achlamydeous flowers. So note that point. Flowers which don't have calyx and corolla is seen in this particular example, that is poinsettia, that is Euphorbia pulcherrima. And another very important feature, so as to speak, is the presence of nectar glands, in the sense that there are usually two glands by the sides which produce nectar, and the whole involucre is cup shaped. So these are two additional points in addition to the Achlamydeous flowers, which is so important. So let's have a look at a diagram to get a better understanding. You have a central well developed female flower which is surrounded by a lot of male flowers on both the sides, something like a extension. You can see something like a extent development, which is the nectary gland, the glands which produce nectar. And we can easily see that the whole thing is quite cup shaped. So once again, also note the point that if you have a look at the whole inflorescence, it looks like something like a single flower, which is one of the characteristic features of the Cyathium inflorescence. So thanks for watching this video. Hope that it was quite useful for the studies and you people liked it. So please subscribe to our channel and share and like this video. And in this video we'll be starting a new series, and we'll be looking at leaves, which in a manner is the most important part of a plant, because leaves basically modifications especially intended for photosynthesis, and photosynthesis is the primary source of energy intake for the entire life cycle, entire cycle dealing with all the living things. So that's very important.